You're mischaracterizing the entire point. Stephen Miller's voice sliced through the room like a jagged blade. Again, Mr. Miller, with all due respect, Jasmine Crockett began, calm but firm. He cut in. Again. That's not what, I said. That's not what any rational person— Mr. Miller, she tried, raising her hand. If I could just— No, because if you're going to accuse me of— The gavel slammed once, then again. A second of stunned silence followed, hanging in the air like thunder before a storm. Even the aides paused their note-taking. The hearing chair leaned forward, unsure whether to intervene or witness history. That was interruption. Number 6. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply shifted her weight forward, slow and deliberate, locking eyes with the man across from her like a seasoned boxer watching her opponent telegraph the same punch over and over again. Miller sat back, smug, self-satisfied, unaware he had just crossed an invisible line. Crockett's lips parted slightly. Her voice, when it came, didn't rise. It lowered. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Miller," she said, her tone velvet but heavy, like a hammer wrapped in silk. Around the chamber, phones quietly tilted upward. Journalists froze mid-sentence. A staffer's eyes widened in real time. Because everyone knew. This wasn't just a reply. It was the calm before detonation. Miller opened his mouth, then paused. For the first time all morning, he wasn't sure what to say, or whether he should say anything at all, Crockett continued, gaze unbroken, her words measured and slow. You've had your say 6 times now. 6 times you've chosen noise over truth. So before I respond, really respond, you might want to ask yourself— She leaned in. Do you want your legacy to be this? Gasps. Audible, actual gasps. A tremor of murmurs. The camera swung. To Miller, then back to Crockett. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done, and her 7th response would become an instant legend. The confrontation didn't begin that morning. It had been building for years. Slowly, painfully, inevitably. The hearing was supposed to be procedural. Another round of testimony on immigration policy and the long-term impacts of family separation, racial profiling, and detention center abuses. But there was nothing routine about who showed up, or why. Stephen Miller hadn't been subpoenaed. He volunteered. Some said he wanted to clarify public misconceptions. Others knew better. This was his theater. His return to relevance. The architect of some of the most controversial immigration policies in modern U.S. history, Miller wasn't here to testify. He was here to perform. He walked into that chamber like he owned it. Sharp suit, barely concealed sneer. The same ideological armor that had shielded him through 4 years of public outcry, federal lawsuits, and international condemnation. He believed even now that he couldn't be touched. Across the room sat Reporter Jasmine Crockett, freshman firebrand from Texas, civil rights attorney turned congresswoman, unfiltered, unafraid, and unbothered by Washington's unspoken etiquette. Her rise hadn't been groomed. It had been earned, courtroom by courtroom, protest by protest, fight by fight. In recent months, clips of her had gone viral. Not because she chased the spotlight, but because when injustice crossed her path, she didn't flinch. She called it by name, and called it out, loud. She wore her identity with pride, and didn't care if it made some people uncomfortable. So when she saw Miller's name on the witness list, she didn't roll her eyes. She sharpened her questions. What the public didn't know, not yet, was that Crockett had worked immigration defense cases during the peak of the Trump-era crackdowns. She had seen families shattered, children orphaned by bureaucracy. She had sat with mothers who cried through translators. She had drafted emergency filings at midnight to stop deportations with 1 bar of courtroom Wi-Fi. To her, this hearing wasn't just about policy. It was about people, and the man across from her, He wasn't just an analyst, he was the architect. The speechwriter turned enforcer who helped turn xenophobia into federal mandate, separating toddlers at borders, proposing English-only reforms, slashing refugee caps, and all the while calling it national security. He thought he was coming to out-debate a lawmaker. He didn't realize he was sitting across from someone who had lived the consequences of his decisions. Every interruption, every deflection he threw her way that morning wasn't just rudeness, it was a reminder of every client she had lost, every plea denied, every family torn apart under the cold language of policy enforcement. But Miller didn't see it. He was too busy smirking, spinning, interrupting. And Crockett, she was waiting. Not to erupt, but to strike, because this wasn't just political theater. This was personal. And as she stared him down from across that hearing table, she wasn't thinking about a viral moment. She was thinking about justice. Millions were watching. But few realized this was personal for both of them. Stephen Miller didn't stumble into controversy. He built it, stone by stone, policy by policy, speech by speech. To the public, he was the pale, tight-lipped advisor often lurking behind Donald Trump, at rallies and press briefings, rarely smiling, never blinking. But beneath the shadow, Miller wasn't a side character. He was the architect. The unseen hand shaping America's most divisive immigration policies in generations. He didn't just enforce cruelty. He intellectualized it. In memos leaked to the press, Miller pushed for zero-tolerance border enforcement, a sanitized phrase that concealed the horror it unleashed. Under his framework, crying children were wrestled from their parents and placed in chain-link detention facilities. Thousands vanished into a bureaucratic maze with no plan for reunification. A generation traumatized, in the name of deterrence, and yet Miller defended it all, with cold precision and chilling ease. On Fox News, he spoke of sovereignty. On talk radio, he railed against lawlessness. But behind the rhetoric lay a quieter mission, reshaping America's identity itself. We must preserve our culture, he said once. We must stop the erosion of our nation from within. But what culture was he preserving? Born to a family of Jewish immigrants who fled anti-Semitism, Miller's own ancestors were once the very people he now seeks to bar. A great-grandmother who couldn't speak English. A great-grandfather who arrived penniless. Their story, survival, adaptation, pride, is the American story. But Stephen Miller didn't honor it. He buried it. Instead, he built a platform on fear, that immigration is invasion, that diversity is dilution, that those seeking refuge are threats, not humans. He crafted speeches warning of illegal aliens pouring into our communities. He urged bans on Central American asylum seekers. He lobbied for reduced legal immigration, even those who followed every rule. When journalists uncovered private emails where he pushed white nationalist websites as source material, Miller didn't flinch. He deflected, gaslit, reframed, and the administration stood by him because that was his gift, spinning poison into policy. In leaked audio, Miller once scoffed at the Statue of Liberty's poem, "Give me your tired, your poor." He dismissed it as an afterthought. Not law, not relevant, but the cruelty was the point. His policies didn't just affect undocumented immigrants. They struck refugees, green card holders, even legal applicants waiting years in line. He created wealth tests, language tests, religious bans, all while insisting, this isn't about race, it's about security. But the real insecurity was never national. It was ideological. Miller wanted an America whiter, narrower, and colder, one that forgot the Ellis Island welcome, one that mistrusted brown skin at airports, one that viewed struggle not as something to admire, but something to exclude. And he didn't care who he silenced to make it happen. Journalists, faith leaders, lawyers, mothers. He interrupted them all, because control wasn't just policy. It was posture. It was volume. It was dominance. That's why when Jasmine Crockett began to speak, calmly with authority, Miller's instinct was to interrupt, again and again and again. He wasn't debating. He was asserting. He was doing what he had always done, trying to talk over people who had lived what he had only theorized, but the world was no longer a closed boardroom. Every time he spoke, Twitter lit up. Who invited Stephen Miller? One user posted, racking up 100,000 likes. This man belongs in court, not Congress, another wrote. Even former administration officials distanced themselves. Journalists revisited old headlines. Lawyers reposted photos of crying toddlers at the border. The truth had never gone away. It had only waited. And now, it had a voice. Because across the table from Stephen Miller sat someone who didn't need a memo to understand what his policies meant. She had walked with the families, filed the briefs, spoken at the vigils. She wasn't afraid of him. She was ready for him. But Crockett, she came prepared, and she wasn't there to play nice. Jasmine Crockett didn't grow up aiming for Congress, she grew up aiming for justice. Raised in St. Louis, she was a preacher's kid who learned early that conviction wasn't about volume. It was about values. Her parents taught her that dignity didn't require permission, that truth didn't have to shout to be heard, and that if you see something broken, you fix it. She carried those lessons all the way to law school, where she chose the path to, few do, defense. Not for glory, not for headlines, but for the voiceless. In the Dallas courtroom trenches, Crockett became a force. Standing beside the wrongly accused, facing down prosecutors twice her age, out-preparing, out-arguing, and outlasting them. Her reputation wasn't about theatrics, it was about results. And when her clients walked free because the system tried to eat them alive, she didn't boast. She got back to work, but her fight didn't stop at the bench. She stepped into protests, community boards, voting rights battles. She became the attorney activists called when police silence turned violent, when voter suppression wore a new suit, when injustice tried to hide behind red tape. Then came 2020. The state of Texas, reeling from COVID and chaos, became a front line in the battle for democracy. Gerrymandering, purged voter rolls, ghost candidates. All of it came crashing down. And Crockett didn't flinch. She filed lawsuits, organized drives, showed up with clipboards and conviction. And when the people of Texas needed a new kind of leader, someone who wouldn't just speak truth but live it, they elected her to the State House. But even in office, she didn't trade fire for finesse. She brought both. During a grueling late-night session meant to jam through restrictive voting laws, Crockett stood on the floor and refused to be silenced. She read the bill line by line, called out its architects, exposed its buried clauses for hours, her voice hoarse, her body tired, but her purpose never wavering. Her colleagues tried to move past her. She made them stop. It wasn't long before national eyes turned to her. Not for performance, but for perseverance. Then came her breakout moment on Capitol Hill. Newly elected to Congress, Jasmine Crockett was underestimated by the old guard, dismissed by the pundits, labeled as too brash, too bold, too much. And yet, the moment cameras rolled, she delivered the line that stopped a nation. Don't confuse my eyelashes with a lack of intellect. It went viral in minutes because it wasn't just a quote, it was a declaration. That brilliance didn't need to shrink to be palatable. That identity didn't need to be erased to be accepted. That black women in power didn't owe anyone softness to be legitimate. That day, Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every woman told to quiet down, every immigrant child told to wait their turn, every underdog who walked into a room they weren't supposed to be in, and owned it anyway. And she didn't stop. She fought for fair housing, police accountability, reproductive rights. She held press conferences after hearings to explain the truth buried under legal jargon. She used social media not to self-promote, but to educate. She brought her community into Congress, live stream by live stream, quote by quote. In her district, people didn't just know her name. They trusted it. They called her when families were torn apart by ICE raids. They reached out when landlords locked out tenants in the middle of summer. They lined up for her town halls, because unlike most politicians, she showed up, on time, on the ground and on their side. And what truly set Crockett apart wasn't just her courage, it was her clarity. Where others hesitated, she named names. Where others waffled, she made war plans, and where others chased headlines, she chased results. So when Stephen Miller sat across from her in that hearing room, polished, smug, already preparing to interrupt, he didn't know who he was dealing with. To him, she was another progressive lawmaker to steamroll, a footnote. To her, he was a living monument to everything she'd spent her life fighting against. And so when he cut her off once, she noted it. Twice, she filed it away. 3, 4, 5 times. She stayed calm. But when interruption number 6 landed rude and arrogant as ever, Jasmine Crockett looked up, not shaken, not rattled, just ready. And so when Stephen Miller tried to bulldoze her with interruption number 6, he had no idea what was coming. The chamber settled into that brittle quiet that always came before impact. Jasmine Crockett adjusted. The mic unfolded her notes and began. "Mr. Miller," she said evenly, "I'd like to revisit your 2018 remarks where you referred to certain immigrants as out of context," Miller barked, waving a dismissive hand. Interruption. One Crockett didn't react. She merely blinked. "I'll yield the time back after I finish my question," she said. "Now, as I was saying, I'm just asking for accuracy, Congresswoman." Interruption 2. A subtle eye roll echoed from the left side of the chamber. Someone whispered, "He's doing it again." Crockett leaned forward, voice still, calm. "You've been documented using terms like invasion, chain migration, and that's standard legal terminology. Nothing inflammatory about that." Interruption 3. A beat, a small twitch at the corner of Crockett's mouth. "Not frustration, calculation." "Sir," she said gently, "you've had several opportunities to clarify your positions. I'm reclaiming my time." From across the table, Miller smiled tightly as if amused by the formality. But the air was shifting. "Your language has consequences," she continued, "and I think the American people deserve to know—" "Consequences?" Miller laughed, almost incredulous. "Are we really pretending words equal violence now?" Interruption 4. Gasps. Audible now. One staffer's eyebrows shot up. On Twitter, someone clipped the moment. It was spreading. Crockett glanced briefly toward the committee chair, but didn't ask for help. She didn't need a referee. She had something else in mind. "You helped write the policy that allowed toddlers to be held in cages," she said. "You have to own that." Miller's posture stiffened. "Oh, please, Congresswoman, that's not what happened." Interruption 5. This time, Crockett didn't blink. She just waited. The pause, somehow, said more than any comeback. Then she began again, measured. "During your tenure, asylum protections were gutted. Children were taken from their parents without plans for reunification. And yet here you are, defending the rule of law," Miller snapped, "which I doubt you even—" Interruption 6. The room froze. It wasn't just the 6th time. It was the way he said it. The tone, the undercurrent. Even Miller realized he'd gone too far. Jasmine Crockett didn't respond immediately. She stared at him. Not in anger, in silence, like a teacher waiting for a disruptive student to realize he'd said something he couldn't walk back. A flicker of something passed behind her eyes. Not hurt, resolve. Around the room, breaths were held. On screens across the country, volume was turned up. Twitter feeds paused mid-scroll. Something was coming. She took a breath. And then, the seventh line dropped like thunder. She took a slow breath, measured, intentional. Then Jasmine Crockett leaned into the mic, not with volume, but with precision. The kind of silence that commands the floor before a storm. "Mr. Miller," she began, "I've listened to you talk over me 6 times now." 6. A pause. The number hung in the air like a final warning bell. And every time it's been the same song. Deflect, deny, derail. Stephen Miller shifted slightly but didn't speak. Not yet. He didn't realize he was already standing in the blast zone. You didn't come here to provide facts. You didn't come here to clarify policy. You came here to audition. Another pause. For your next Fox News hit. Gasps rippled through the chamber like aftershocks. A staffer blinked twice. One lawmaker bit their lip to suppress a grin. A hot mic caught the phrase, "Oh," she snapped, but Crockett wasn't finished. "See, I've sat across from actual asylum seekers. I've held the hands of mothers who couldn't find their babies because of what your policies did. And you," she gestured slightly across the table, "you're sitting here trying to rewrite that trauma like it's a press release." Miller's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. "Let me be clear," Crockett continued, each word like a gavel stroke. "You can gaslight the media. You can spin donors. You can even out-talk most of the folks in this room. Beat. But not me." That line landed. Hard. The room shifted. Physically, shoulders leaned forward, eyes widened. "You're not intimidating. You're not impressive. You're just loud. And frankly, loud doesn't mean right." Social media lit up like a flare. Jasmine Crockett just ethered Stephen Miller on live TV. Wow. Loud doesn't mean right. Put it on a shirt. She's speaking for all of us. Still, Crockett didn't break eye contact. She wasn't performing, she was testifying. "And let me give you a lesson since you clearly didn't learn this at Duke," she said. "Or from the Constitution you like to cherry-pick." She leaned in, lower, quieter. But every syllable struck like steel. When you spend your life targeting the most vulnerable, the day will come when someone stands up and looks you in the eye, not from anger, but from clarity, and tells you. Another pause. Even the air seemed to lean closer. "Your cruelty doesn't make you strong. It makes you small." A long silence followed. Not a stunned silence, a silence earned. Miller didn't interrupt this time. He couldn't. Across the room, a staffer stifled a whisper. Did she just end his career? The chairman looked down at his papers, unsure whether to proceed or call recess. Journalists reached for their phones. The entire room felt like it had been turned inside out, then left hanging in gravity's absence. Crockett didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply closed her binder. "Now," she said, turning back to the committee, "I yield my time." The moment didn't need punctuation. It was punctuation, a perfectly timed, soul-level takedown. Not through shouting, not through insults, but through truth. Twitter was already ablaze. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett just dismantled Stephen Miller with pure poise and facts. That wasn't a clapback, that was a civic cleansing. Name one man who survived that. I'll wait. Clips hit TikTok in real time, soundtracked by applause, remixed with trap beats, subtitled for maximum impact. One thread was already going viral. A breakdown of why Jasmine Crockett's takedown was pure rhetorical genius. Line by line, commentators dissected it. You came here to audition. A direct challenge to motive. Undermines his legitimacy in a single sentence. You can gaslight the media, But not me. Asserts dominance, reclaims control of the narrative. Loud doesn't mean right. Universal truth. Instantly memeable, instantly quotable. Your cruelty doesn't make you strong, it makes you small. Devastating. Ethically grounded. Impossible to rebut without looking crueler. And the delivery measured. Patient. Devastating. Back in the chamber, Miller finally blinked. He reached for his water, but his hand hesitated. He looked like a man who had planned for a debate and walked into a reckoning. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't even look back because this moment wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who'd been talked over, stepped on, lied to, everyone whose truth was interrupted 6 times, 7 times, 70 times, and who finally stood up and said, "No more." The headlines rolled in minutes later. Crockett crushes Miller in live hearing showdown. Jasmine Crockett, the new face of political accountability. Mic drop heard around the hill. But Crockett didn't need headlines. She had something better. The truth. The moment. The eyes of millions. And as the video spread, through group chats, college campuses, dinner tables, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a takedown. It became a movement overnight. By the time the hearing adjourned, Jasmine Crockett's name had already broken into Twitter's top trending topics, not because she shouted, but because she shut it down. With elegance, with clarity, and with a line that echoed louder than any gavel ever could. Within an hour, TikTok was flooded, with lip syncs, reaction videos, and fan-made edits overlaying her voice with orchestral crescendos and slow-motion zooms. A 19-year-old media major from Atlanta turned the moment into a split-screen duet. One side Jasmine, the other side himself, mouthing every word in sync, ending with a silent salute. The quote, "Your cruelty doesn't make you strong, it makes you small," became a battle cry. It was printed on T-shirts by nightfall, projected onto dorm walls across the country, screensavers, tweets, graffiti on a subway in New York by morning. News networks scrambled to catch up. The moment wasn't just viral, it was cultural. CNN aired a 5-minute segment looping the exchange, calling it one of the most decisive dismantlings of a political figure in recent memory. MSNBC ran a split-screen analysis. Jasmine Crockett on the left, Stephen Miller on the right, pausing at key facial reactions like it was a forensic breakdown. "You could see the confidence drain from his face," the host noted. That wasn't a talking point. That was truth hitting bone. Even Fox News couldn't ignore it. Their headline, "Progressive Congresswoman Attacks Former Trump Advisor," was meant as a critique, but online it read like a badge of honor. Late-night hosts had a field day. On The Daily Show, the monologue opened with, "Stephen Miller walked into a hearing, and Jasmine Crockett handed him a receipt, a mirror, and a moral spine." The audience roared. On Last Week Tonight, John Oliver replayed the clip in full, only pausing to yell, "Say it again for the people in the back." Students at Howard University printed out the quote and taped it across dorm room doors. At UC Berkeley, a poli-sci professor rewrote part of his syllabus overnight to include the hearing as a case study in rhetorical strategy. Across Instagram, artists began sketching Crockett in profile. Fierce, poised, mid-sentence, framed by her own words. A digital portrait went viral with the caption, "We're not here to be quiet. We're here to be heard." But this wave wasn't just about going viral. It was about validation. In barbershops and nail salons, in classrooms and family chats, people were watching the clip not once, but twice. They were passing it around like oxygen. For every person who had been talked over, ignored, interrupted, Jasmine Crockett became something more than a congresswoman. She became proof. Proof that dignity could win. That clarity could silence noise. That identity when owned fully and unapologetically, could crack through even the thickest political armor. One tweet read, "As a black girl who got told I was too loud, too opinionated, too much, Jasmine Crockett just baptized my entire soul." Another, "Jasmine said what my mama wished she could say when ICE knocked on our neighbor's door." And another, simple but piercing, "I've never felt more seen." In that one exchange, Crockett didn't just dismantle a man's argument, she dismantled an entire legacy of being interrupted. And behind the scenes, Crockett wasn't celebrating. She was answering messages. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. People reaching out not for photo ops, but for thank yous. A woman in Detroit who'd lost her job during the pandemic and still faced eviction. A Dreamer student in Florida who clipped the video to rewatch before her law school. Interviews. A grandmother in Phoenix who'd marched in the 60s and said, "That girl speaks like we used to march." The resonance wasn't performative, it was personal. She hadn't just called out a man, she had called in a movement, and the momentum didn't stop there. A meme emerged overnight. The Crockett Doctrine. A screenshot of her face mid-sentence, with a 3-point manifesto underneath. Reclaim your time. Reclaim your voice. Reclaim your power. By morning, even members of Congress were quoting her. A progressive senator posted, "We don't need more noise in Washington. We need more Jasmine Crockett's." In high schools, student councils played the clip before meetings. In churches, youth groups turned her words into spoken word performances. She had become, almost overnight, a symbol of something deeper. Not just resistance, but readiness. The kind of readiness that comes from lived experience, from years of being the only voice in a room, from knowing the stakes and still choosing to stand. But the most powerful moment came not from a screen, but from a letter she received the next day. The letter came in a plain white envelope, no return address, just a child's careful handwriting. Inside, the ink wobbled slightly, as if the writer's hand had trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what she needed to say. "Dear Congresswoman Crockett, my name is Aaliyah. I'm 11. I live in Houston with my grandma. We watched your video after dinner." She cried. I didn't cry. I smiled. "You showed me we don't have to be quiet." Jasmine Crockett read the words slowly, then again. She placed the letter on her desk and stared at it for a long time, because in that moment, everything came into focus. That hearing wasn't about Stephen Miller. It wasn't even about her. It was about Aaliyah, and every person like her who needed to see what power looks like when it wears their face, speaks their truth, refuses to shrink. Later that night, Crockett gave an interview on MSNBC. The anchor leaned forward, voice lowered. "You didn't raise your voice, but you raised the stakes. How did you keep your composure?" Crockett smiled. "I didn't need to be loud. Truth doesn't have a volume. It has a spine." The clip echoed across social media within minutes. Teachers printed the quote for their classroom walls. Activists stitched it onto protest banners. Artists turned it into calligraphy. But Jasmine Crockett didn't dwell in the praise. She knew the fight wasn't won in a viral moment. It was fought every day in committee rooms, community centers, courtrooms, places where truth too often gets interrupted, silenced, or spun into something it's not. And she wasn't done fighting. The lesson she carried into every hearing, every vote, every speech was simple: dignity over dominance, always. In a political culture addicted to outrage, Crockett had chosen resolve. In a building where shouting got headlines, she had let stillness speak. She didn't back down, but she didn't lower herself either, because she understood something her critics never could. We rise louder than we're interrupted. Not in volume, in value, in presence, in persistence, in refusing to disappear just because someone thinks they can outtalk you. As she left the chamber that day, headlines swirling, memes spreading, cameras still lingering, She didn't look back. She didn't gloat. She adjusted her blazer. She thanked her staff. She walked forward, unshaken, unbothered, unbowed. Stephen Miller interrupted Jasmine Crockett 6 times. 6 times he tried to bulldoze her voice. 6 times he underestimated who he was speaking to. But it was her 7th line, the one that came not with fury but with focus, that shut it all down. Not because she raised her voice, but because she raised the truth. That's why this moment went viral. Because we recognized something in her, something fierce, familiar, and necessary. We saw what happens when someone refuses to be talked over, when they choose clarity over chaos, dignity over dominance, and we felt it. Deeply. Because too many of us have been interrupted 6 times too many. So if Jasmine Crockett's words lit something in you, if you saw your mother, your sister, your teacher, your younger self in her poise, if you believe the truth deserves the mic, not just the loudest voice in the room, then share this story. Send it to someone who needs to hear that 7th line. Comment the moment you knew she won. And subscribe. Not just to this channel, but to the idea that voices like Jasmine's don't need permission to lead. They just need to be heard, because the next time someone tries to interrupt history, they might just find out it talks back.